inside my house until I saw him standing there, watching me through the window. Nightmare 1. My phone vibrated at 2:14 a.m. At first, I ignored it. I had only installed the motion camera a few days earlier after a series of break-ins were reported in nearby neighborhoods. I figured the alert was probably just a stray cat or headlights passing by. Then the notification came again. Motion detected. Side yard half awake, I opened the app expecting to see nothing, but there was someone standing beside my house, completely still, facing the camera. The person wasn't trying to hide. They weren't moving. They were just standing there. I zoomed in, expecting to recognize a delivery driver or someone who had the wrong address. It was my neighbor. Kevin lived 2 houses down. We had spoken maybe twice. He always seemed quiet but polite enough. But the timestamp showed he had been standing there for almost 4 minutes, doing nothing, just watching my house. I checked the other camera angles. He had walked into my yard from the side street, slowly, deliberately, like he knew exactly where the camera's blind spots were. The next morning, I convinced myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe he heard a noise. Maybe he thought something was wrong. That afternoon, I casually asked if everything was okay the night before. His reaction felt rehearsed. "Oh yeah, I thought I saw someone run through your yard earlier," he said quickly. That didn't make sense. The camera footage showed he had arrived after the motion alert triggered, not before. I started reviewing older footage. Night after night, small clips showed the same thing. Kevin walking near the edge of my property, pausing near windows, sometimes standing just outside the camera's main focus range, always late at night, always when my lights were off. One clip showed him slowly reaching toward my back door handle, then pulling his hand away. Another showed him standing inches from the side window, leaning slightly as if trying to see inside. I confronted him again. He seemed to stop, but I stopped leaving my blinds open at night, because sometimes the people who live nearby aren't just neighbors. Sometimes they're studying your routine, waiting to learn when no one's watching. Except them. I thought cameras would make me feel safer, but the next story proves sometimes the danger isn't outside your house. Sometimes it's already inside your property line. If these stories are unsettling so far, make sure to subscribe, because Nightmare Central is just getting started. Nightmare 2. When I first moved into the house, the woman next door introduced herself within minutes. Her name was Elaine. She was in her late 60s, soft-spoken, and seemed genuinely friendly. She told me she had lived in the neighborhood for over 30 years. "Everyone looks out for each other here," she said, with a reassuring smile. At first, I appreciated the warmth. She often waved from her porch while I left for work. Occasionally, she'd mention small details about the neighborhood, which houses had security systems, who traveled often, which streets were the safest to park overnight. It felt helpful. Until I noticed how often she seemed to be watching. Her kitchen window faced directly into my backyard. Any time I stepped outside, even briefly, I could see her silhouette standing near the curtain. At first, I told myself she was probably just curious about the new neighbor, but the comments she made started becoming oddly specific. "You got home late last Thursday. I noticed your sister visited over the weekend. You forgot to close your garage all the way on Monday." Each time she mentioned something, she said it casually, like normal conversation. But I never told her any of those things. One evening, I noticed something strange along the property line. Small garden decorations had appeared along the fence. Bird feeders, wind chimes, small solar lights. They weren't there before. They were positioned in a way that seemed intentional, each one angled slightly toward my backyard, not hers. That night, I walked along the fence and noticed several of the decorations had small, reflective surfaces. Tiny mirrors, glass, polished metal, all positioned at slightly different angles. It didn't take long to realize what they were doing. They allowed someone standing in her kitchen window to see multiple parts of my backyard that weren't directly visible before, including the sliding door into my house and part of my living room. I stopped using the backyard completely after that. I kept the blinds closed even during the day. 2 weeks later, I came home to find Elaine standing in my driveway. "I noticed your curtains were closed all day," she said. "You usually open them around 8:15. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just observing casually. She was tracking. I installed privacy film on every window that weekend, and I stopped answering the door when she knocked, because sometimes neighbors don't need cameras. Sometimes curiosity is enough. Being watched from outside your house is unsettling. But the final nightmare proves sometimes neighbors don't just observe your life. Sometimes they quietly become part of it. Nightmare 3. I didn't think much about the duplex when I first moved in. The rent was reasonable, the neighborhood was quiet, and the landlord assured me the previous tenant had lived there for years without any problems. The only thing he mentioned was that the walls were a little thin. At first, I only noticed normal sounds: footsteps, doors closing, occasional movement late at night. My neighbor introduced himself a few days after I moved in. His name was Martin. He seemed reserved but polite. He told me he worked from home most days. That explained why I occasionally heard movement during the afternoon. But over time, I started noticing something unsettling. The sounds didn't feel random. They felt reactive. If I walked into the kitchen, I'd hear movement on the other side of the wall. If I turned on the shower, I'd hear footsteps stop directly opposite the bathroom wall. If I stayed up late watching TV, the faint sound of pacing would continue on the other side until I turned the television off. It started feeling less like coincidence and more like synchronization. One night, I tested the feeling. I stood quietly in the hallway for several minutes without moving, completely silent. After about 30 seconds, I heard movement on the other side of the wall. Slow footsteps, then silence, as if someone was standing directly opposite me, listening. I tried to ignore the feeling until small things inside my home began to feel slightly off. A kitchen cabinet left slightly open. Bathroom light already turned on when I was sure I had switched it off earlier. One evening, I noticed something strange near the shared wall in the bedroom. A faint outline in the paint, a small rectangular shape slightly darker than the surrounding wall, almost unnoticeable unless you were specifically looking for it. Curious, I gently pressed against the drywall. It flexed slightly. That didn't seem normal. The next day, while reorganizing furniture, I moved the dresser that had been placed against that wall since I moved in. Behind it, near the baseboard, was a small circular indentation, perfectly cut, about the size of a coin, covered with a small piece of painted tape. I carefully peeled the tape away. Behind it was a hole, a small viewing hole drilled through the drywall, directly facing the bed. I felt sick. I immediately checked other areas along the wall, near the living room, near the hallway, near the kitchen, 3 more holes, all carefully concealed, all positioned at angles that allowed someone to see into nearly every room of the house. Police later confirmed the holes had been made from the other side of the wall, from my neighbor's unit. When officers searched Martin's side of the duplex, they found small marks in the drywall where patches had been removed and replaced repeatedly. They also found a notebook. Inside were pages filled with handwritten observations. Times I left for work, times lights turned on and off, when guests visited, how long they stayed, what time I usually went to sleep. One page simply read, "Predictable schedule." I moved out the following week, but sometimes late at night, I still think about how long someone had been quietly watching from the other side of the wall, learning every routine, every habit, every private moment, and the most disturbing part. If I hadn't moved that dresser, I may have never known they were there. Something even scarier than this nightmare is not watching more videos from Nightmare Central. This was Nightmares of Neighbors. Sleep carefully.